I am Jessica Harper, 35 years old, and I specialize in tracking endangered species across North America. My grandparents left me their small cabin bordering a national forest in Montana, my sanctuary between research expeditions. After 6 months in Alaska, documenting wolf migration patterns, I returned home to a family dinner where my brother Derek smugly announced, "I sold your little house for $850,000. My family cheered, calling it my first smart decision. If only they knew the property was federally protected land. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from. Hit subscribe if you have ever had family members who thought they knew better than you about your own life. Growing up in suburban Chicago, my family never understood my fascination with wildlife and conservation. My parents, Richard and Susan Harper, built a successful real estate development business, transforming natural spaces into shopping malls and luxury condominiums. They raised their 3 children to follow in their footsteps, instilling values centered around financial success and material acquisition. My older sister Natalie became a corporate attorney, specializing in commercial property law, while my younger brother Derek joined the family business, eager to prove himself as the only son. Then there was me, the middle child, the dreamer, who preferred catching frogs in local ponds to attending open houses. From an early age, I knew I was different. While my siblings collected designer clothes and electronic gadgets, I saved my allowance to donate to wildlife conservation funds. My bedroom walls featured posters of endangered species rather than pop stars. Family vacations to resorts and theme parks left me yearning for wilderness adventures instead. College marked my first real escape. While my parents expected me to study business or law, I pursued a biology degree, eventually earning a PhD in wildlife conservation. Each holiday break brought tense conversations about when I would grow up and find a real job with actual income potential. My research positions and field studies across remote areas were dismissed as extended camping trips rather than legitimate scientific work. Derek, 5 years, my junior, always found my career choices particularly amusing. Playing with animals, he called it unable to comprehend the rigorous scientific research involved in my conservation efforts. Our relationship deteriorated further after our grandparents passed away 7 years ago. My maternal grandparents, unlike their daughter, had a deep appreciation for nature. They owned a modest 2-bedroom cabin on 40 acres of land bordering a national forest in Montana. Throughout my childhood, I spent summers there with them, learning to identify native plants, track wildlife, and respect the delicate ecosystem. My grandfather, a retired biology teacher, nurtured my scientific curiosity, while my grandmother, a skilled naturalist, taught me to move quietly through the forest, observing without disturbing. When they passed within months of each other, I was devastated. To everyone's surprise, they left the cabin and surrounding land specifically to me in their will. My parents and siblings were shocked, having assumed the property would be sold and the proceeds divided equally. The cabin itself was nothing spectacular, built in the 1950s, with rustic charm but few modern amenities. Its value lay in the land, situated near increasingly popular vacation areas where wealthy urbanites sought mountain retreats. From the moment I inherited the property, my family pressured me to sell. "You could buy a decent condo in Chicago," my mother argued. "Why keep a rundown cabin you visit twice a year?" Derek was particularly persistent, frequently sending me listing prices of similar properties that had sold for impressive sums. "That money could jumpstart your actual life," he would say, as though my current existence was merely a placeholder for something more conventional. What my family never understood was my profound emotional connection to that land. The cabin represented more than real estate. It was my spiritual home where I felt most connected to my work and purpose. I renovated it minimally, maintaining its rustic character while adding solar panels and a small workspace for analyzing field data. Between research expeditions, I retreated there to write scientific papers and recharge in the surrounding wilderness. 3 years ago, Derek's financial troubles began after several failed investment schemes. Always drawn to get rich quick opportunities, he lost a significant amount in cryptocurrency speculation, followed by an ill-advised restaurant venture that closed within 6 months. His solution was taking increasingly risky real estate deals within the family business, some skirting ethical boundaries. My parents, especially my father, covered his losses, repeatedly explaining it away as business experience. During this period, Derek renewed his campaign for me to sell the cabin. His suggestions became thinly veiled demands, often coupled with comments about family loyalty. If you really cared about this family, you would sell that worthless property and help the business, he said, during one particularly heated Thanksgiving dinner. My refusals were met with eye rolls and accusations of selfishness. My last visit home, before my Alaska expedition, highlighted the growing divide. Derek had just lost another significant investment and was drinking heavily at a family dinner. Your precious animals contribute nothing to society, he slurred across the table. You waste your education playing forest ranger while refusing to help your own brother. I left early that night, hurt by his words and the silent agreement in my parents' expressions. 2 weeks later, I departed for Alaska, spending 6 months in remote wilderness tracking wolf populations threatened by climate change. Communication was limited to occasional satellite phone check-ins with my research partner and monthly emails when we reached villages with internet access. My family knew about my expedition and its duration, though they showed little interest in the details. My parents sent a brief email saying they were proud of my hobby and hoped I would find direction when I returned. After completing my research documenting vital data on changing migration patterns, I flew back to Chicago, exhausted but fulfilled. I had arranged to stay with Mia, my childhood friend, and the only person who truly supported my career choices, for a few days before heading to my cabin in Montana. She mentioned that my family had planned a welcome dinner, something that surprised me given our strained relationship. Little did I know that this dinner would reveal a betrayal beyond anything I could have imagined, one that would test not only my relationship with my family, but also my commitment to the land I had sworn to protect. After 6 months in the Alaskan wilderness, the Chicago suburbs felt alien to me. The perfectly manicured lawns, identical houses, and constant hum of traffic created a sensory overload after months of natural soundscapes and open spaces. I arrived at my parents' Tudor-style home in the affluent North Shore neighborhood with a knot of apprehension in my stomach. Family gatherings rarely went well for me, but Mia had encouraged me to attend, suggesting that my long absence might have given everyone perspective. Mom greeted me with her standard air kiss near my cheek, careful not to smudge her makeup or disturb her salon. Perfect blonde bob. "Jessica, darling, you look healthy," she said, her tone suggesting that healthy was not necessarily a compliment. Dad offered a firm handshake instead of a hug, his traditional greeting that always kept an emotional distance between us. Natalie, my older sister, nodded coolly from the living room designer glass of wine already in hand. Derek arrived last, making an entrance in a new luxury sports car that screeched into the driveway. He strode into the house wearing an expensive suit and an unusual air of confidence that immediately put me on edge. At 30, my brother had always possessed a swagger that exceeded his accomplishments, but tonight he seemed particularly self-satisfied. The wilderness woman returns to civilization, he announced, looking me up and down with barely concealed disdain for my practical clothing and minimal makeup. Did you forget how to use a hairbrush out there with the bears? I forced a smile too tired for confrontation. Good to see you too, Derek. The wolves send their regards. Dinner was served in the formal dining room, a space reserved for special occasions and important discussions. Mom had ordered catering from an upscale restaurant, the dishes artfully arranged, but lacking the comfort of home cooking. Dad opened an expensive bottle of wine, pouring generously for everyone, except me, assuming incorrectly that my conservation work equated to a rejection of all life's pleasures. The conversation flowed around me like a river around a stone. Natalie discussed her recent promotion and the luxury condominium she was purchasing. Mom detailed their upcoming Mediterranean cruise, while Dad proudly shared the business's expansion into a new suburban development. I contributed little, knowing my stories of tracking wildlife through snowstorms would not impress this audience. Midway through the main course, Derek clinked his glass, drawing everyone's attention. His smile widened as he looked directly at me. I think we should toast Jessica, he said, raising his glass. Her return from the wilderness coincides with some excellent financial news. I tensed, unsure what he could possibly mean. My research grants were renewed, but hardly newsworthy to this materialistic crowd. While you were playing with wolves, sis, I took care of that little property problem of yours. Derek continued, his voice dripping with self-congratulation. I sold your little house for $850,000. The table erupted in cheers and congratulations, my parents beaming with pride. Finally, Mom exclaimed. Finally making some smart decisions about your future. Dad nodded approvingly. That money invested properly could set you up nicely. Derek has some excellent suggestions for where to put it. Natalie raised her glass. Welcome to adult life, little sister. I sat frozen, the food turning to ash in my mouth as I processed what I was hearing. My cabin, my sanctuary, my research base, sold without my knowledge or consent. The property that had been specifically left to me by my grandparents, the land I had sworn to protect, sold by my own brother. 1,000 questions raced through my mind. How could he possibly have executed a sale without my signature? Who would buy property without meeting the actual owner? What legal maneuvers had he employed to pull this off? Yet beneath the shock, another emotion surfaced, a calm certainty. I knew something my family did not. Something that would make this fraudulent sale spectacularly backfire. Rather than exploding in anger, I made a split-second decision to remain quiet and let events unfold naturally. Who were the buyers? I asked, keeping my voice carefully neutral. Derek puffed up with pride. A tech executive and his wife from San Francisco. They planned to tear down that shack and build a modern mountain retreat. Paid full asking price, no haggling. They were so eager, they even handled most of the paperwork remotely. How exactly did you manage the sale without me? I asked, genuinely curious about the extent of his fraud. My brother waved dismissively. Power of attorney paperwork. You signed it years ago for emergencies, remember? Plus, I handled all the communications. Told them you were unreachable on expedition. Easy enough to sign your name after practicing it a few times. My parents exchanged a quick glance that confirmed their knowledge of this deception. They had enabled him, perhaps even encouraged him. The money is already in a holding account, Derek continued excitedly. Once you sign the final transfer documents, we can move it into some excellent investment opportunities I have lined up. The family business could use a cash injection right now, and there would still be plenty left over for you to get a proper place in the city. The casual admission of fraud, forgery, and identity theft stunned me. In their world, this wasn't criminal activity, but clever business maneuvering justified because it aligned with their values. This really is for your own good, Jessica, my mother added, reaching across to pat my hand condescendingly. That cabin was a waste of potential. Your grandparents meant well, but they didn't understand real estate. You should be thanking your brother, my father chimed in. Property taxes were eating away at any value, and the maintenance costs for a place you barely visit made no financial sense. I took a slow sip of water, buying time to control my expression. They had no idea what they had done, the legal storm they had just unleashed. My silence was clearly interpreted as shock or submission rather than the strategic pause it actually was. Well, Derek prompted, impatient for gratitude or acknowledgement. Aren't you going to say anything? $850,000 is life-changing money for someone like you. I looked around the table at my family. These people who claimed to love me, yet had so little respect for my choices, my property, or my legal rights. I managed a small smile. It certainly is interesting news, I said carefully. When is the closing date? Derek looked triumphant. Already done. Final papers were signed yesterday. I was going to surprise you with the check, but couldn't wait to share the good news. Congratulations, then, I replied, raising my barely touched wine glass to new beginnings. They clinked glasses, enthusiastically interpreting my calm as acceptance. Little did they know that I was mentally calculating exactly how long it would take for federal officials to discover the unauthorized sale of protected land and exactly what legal consequences awaited everyone involved in this fraudulent transaction. The rest of dinner passed in a blur of self-congratulation. My family launched into detailed plans for my money-debating investment strategies and potential properties I should consider, never once asking what I might want. I nodded and smiled at appropriate intervals, while a different conversation played out in my mind, one involving federal agents, environmental protection laws, and serious criminal charges for fraud. As I left that night, Derek hugged me with unusual warmth. Trust me, sis, you will thank me for this. I just did what you never had the courage to do yourself. I looked into his eyes, seeing nothing but absolute conviction in his own righteousness. I believe things will work out exactly as they should, I replied truthfully. Driving back to Mia's apartment, I made a single phone call to my attorney, briefly explaining the situation. Her response was immediate and decisive. Do nothing. Let them discover the problem themselves. Any action from you now might implicate you in the mess they've created. I agreed, hanging up with the certainty that I wouldn't have to wait long for justice to find its way to my brother's doorstep. What my family never knew, what I had deliberately kept from them, was the true nature of my grandparents' property and the legal protections surrounding it. This wasn't simply a cabin in the woods. It was land enrolled in one of the most stringent federal conservation programs in the country. 3 months after inheriting the property, I received a visit from 2 government officials while staying at the cabin. Initially alarmed, I invited them in for coffee, expecting perhaps a routine check about property boundaries or water rights. What they revealed changed my entire understanding of my inheritance. Miss Harper, the older official, began introducing himself as Regional Director of the Federal Land Conservation Program. Your grandparents enrolled this property in our Perpetual Conservation Initiative 27 years ago. We're here to confirm you understand the legal implications of that status. He proceeded to explain that my grandparents, concerned about increasing development pressuring the national forest, had entered into a legally binding agreement with the federal government. In exchange for significant tax benefits during their lifetime, they had placed permanent conservation easements on the property. These easements essentially transferred development rights to the government while allowing them to maintain ownership and residence. The agreement specified that the land must remain in its natural state in perpetuity, prohibiting subdivision, commercial development, or any significant alteration to the landscape. The modest cabin and immediate surroundings were exempt, allowing for residential use, but the remaining 38 acres were legally protected wilderness. This agreement transfers with the land, Miss Harper, the younger official explained, handing me a thick folder of legal documents. It cannot be undone by future owners, and any sale of the property must disclose these restrictions prominently. The new owner would be bound by the same legal restrictions. I remembered my grandfather mentioning conservation efforts, but had no idea about the formal, legal nature of their commitment. As I reviewed the documents, I discovered something even more significant. The property was designated as critical habitat for 3 endangered species, including a rare orchid found in only 7 locations nationwide. Because of the critical habitat designation, any transaction involving this property automatically triggers a federal review, the director explained. Our office must be notified before any sale, and the buyers must sign acknowledgement of the conservation requirements. Over subsequent years, I embraced this legacy wholeheartedly. With my background in wildlife biology, I conducted additional surveys of the property, documenting 7 more rare or threatened species. I submitted this data to federal authorities, strengthening the property's protected status. I established a small research station in the cabin, hosting graduate students studying the surrounding ecosystem. During my time there, I worked closely with Forest Service officials and conservation officers, becoming well known and respected in local environmental circles. The cabin itself remained simple, but I enhanced it with minimally invasive solar panels and rainwater collection systems, making it nearly self-sufficient. I carefully maintained trails that minimized impact on sensitive areas while allowing for necessary scientific observation. Each improvement was documented and approved by conservation officials, creating a thick file of correspondence between myself and various government agencies. I attended annual meetings with regional directors of the conservation program, submitted required monitoring reports, and participated in the ecological survey of adjacent federal lands. What made the situation particularly precarious for my brother was a development that occurred 18 months before my Alaska expedition. The conservation status of the property was elevated after I documented nesting pairs of golden eagles, a federally protected species. This triggered additional protections under the Eagle Protection Act, requiring notification of the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service for any proposed changes to the property. I hosted 2 senior fish and wildlife officials for a 3-day survey, resulting in new boundary markers and official government signage along the property perimeter. These signs clearly stated the protected status and included federal contact information, though they were placed at boundary lines away from the main access road. The final legal protection came through my own initiative. Concerned about development pressures in the region, I applied for and received additional conservation status through a state-level heritage program. This added another layer of oversight, requiring multiple agency approvals for any proposed changes to the land use. All of these legal protections were meticulously documented in county records, attached to the property deed, and filed with multiple state and federal agencies. Any legitimate title search or proper legal review would have immediately revealed these restrictions. The sale my brother arranged could only have happened through deliberate fraud and circumvention of normal legal procedures. 6 weeks before departing for Alaska, I met with my conservation contacts specifically to inform them of my extended absence and to ensure all monitoring would continue. I introduced them to Dr. Eleanor Winters, a colleague who would check on the property monthly in my absence. I filed formal notification of temporary absence with the Conservation Program Office, including my expected return date and emergency contact information. I considered telling my family about these protections many times over the years, but always decided against it. Their dismissive attitude toward conservation and environmental protection made me fear they would view these restrictions as a problem to be solved rather than a commitment to be honored. I worried they might attempt legal challenges to the easements or pressure me to find loopholes. In retrospect, I should have been more transparent, if only to prevent the situation that was now unfolding. But I had naively believed that standard legal procedures would prevent any unauthorized sale, that my brother's scheme would be stopped by normal real estate protocols. What I hadn't accounted for was the extent of my brother's desperation and dishonesty. By forging documents impersonating me and likely bypassing proper legal reviews, he had created a perfect storm of legal violations that would soon crash down on everyone involved. The day after the family dinner, I visited my attorney with all the conservation documentation. She reviewed the materials with increasing concern. "This is extraordinarily serious," she said finally. "The fraudulent sale of federally protected land involves multiple criminal violations. Identity theft, mail fraud, wire fraud, if any electronic communications were involved, and violations of at least 3 environmental protection statutes." "Should I contact the authorities directly?" I asked. She considered carefully before responding. "Not yet. The system has automatic safeguards that should activate soon. The new owners will inevitably attempt to make changes to the property, triggering agency reviews. Or they'll discover the restrictions during their own due diligence and raise alarms. And my brother, my parents, they've created this situation themselves through deliberate, fraudulent actions," she replied firmly. "Your intervention now might actually complicate matters or potentially implicate you in the fraud. Document everything. Maintain your normal correspondence with conservation officials, but let the system work as designed." I left her office with mixed emotions. Part of me wanted to warn my family of the coming storm to protect them despite their betrayal. But another part, the part that had endured years of dismissal and disrespect, recognized that natural consequences might be the only language they would understand. Returning to Mia's apartment, I booked a flight to Montana for the following day. I needed to see my property to ensure it remained unharmed while legal proceedings inevitably unfolded. As I packed, my phone buzzed with a text from Derek: "Meeting with investment advisor tomorrow at 2. Be ready to sign transfer papers. Your future starts now." I didn't respond. His future was about to take a very different turn than he anticipated. The Montana morning greeted me with familiar, comfort, crisp mountain air filling my lungs as I drove the familiar road to my cabin. Fall colors painted the landscape in amber and gold, a stark contrast to my inner turmoil. As I turned onto the private dirt road leading to my property, the first sign of trouble appeared literally in the form of a "Future Home of Elliston Mountain Retreat" sign staked near my driveway. My heart raced as I continued toward the cabin, relieved to find it still standing and apparently untouched. I unlocked the door and stepped inside, immediately feeling the welcoming embrace of the simple space my grandparents had loved. Everything remained as I had left it 6 months ago, preserved in time like a museum to simpler living. After confirming the cabin's interior was undisturbed, I walked the property, checking the research stations and wildlife cameras I had installed. Nothing seemed disturbed yet, though fresh surveyor stakes appeared along the eastern border, fluorescent orange markers standing out garishly against the natural landscape. I photographed everything methodically: the unauthorized sign, the survey stakes, and the undisturbed federal boundary markers. Each image was time-stamped and geotagged, creating a documentary record of the property's current condition. Back at the cabin, I found cell service long enough to receive a flurry of texts from Derek, growing increasingly demanding about meeting financial advisors and signing documents. I ignored them all, focusing instead on contacting Dr. Winters, who had monitored the property during my absence. I documented 2 visits from what appeared to be architects about a month ago, she reported during our call. They were measuring and taking soil samples near the cabin. I informed them they were on private property without permission, but they showed me documents claiming to represent the owner. "Did you contact conservation officials?" I asked. "Immediately," she confirmed. "I spoke with Regional Director Collins at Fish and Wildlife. He said they had received no notification of any proposed development, which automatically raised red flags. They opened an inquiry that day." This explained why the process was already in motion. Federal officials had been alerted weeks ago, meaning the investigation was well underway. I thanked Dr. Winters for her diligence and ended the call feeling a strange combination of vindication and dread. My attorney called that evening with an update. "The buyers applied for development permits with the county last week," she explained. This automatically triggered notification to federal agencies because of the property's status. Environmental Protection Agency and Fish and Wildlife Service officials have already contacted the county to halt any permitting process. "Have they reached out to the buyers yet?" I asked. "Not directly, from what I understand. They're conducting their investigation first, which includes verifying the chain of title and the circumstances of the sale. Given the complete lack of required notifications and approvals, they're approaching this as a potentially criminal matter." Meanwhile, 3,000 miles away in San Francisco, Timothy and Vanessa Elliston were experiencing the first tremors of the earthquake about to upend their lives. The wealthy tech executive and his interior designer wife had purchased what they believed was the perfect location for their dream mountain retreat, a place to escape Silicon Valley pressures. Their architect had submitted preliminary plans to the county planning department for a 6,000 square foot modern home with floor-to-ceiling windows, an infinity pool overlooking the valley, and extensive landscaping. The design required removing most of the existing trees near the cabin and regrading significant portions of the property. The Ellistons had hired a prestigious law firm to handle the transaction, but in their eagerness to secure the property before competing buyers, they had accepted abbreviated due diligence procedures. Their attorney had conducted basic title searches showing clear ownership, but had not discovered the conservation easements buried in decades of county records. 7 days after submitting their development plans, their architect received a strongly worded letter from the county planning department copying multiple federal agencies. The letter denied their application and cited numerous violations of conservation restrictions and federal protections. Confused and alarmed, the Ellistons contacted their attorney, who began a frantic, deeper investigation into the property's legal status. What he discovered sent him rushing to his client's home that evening, with devastating news: they had purchased land that could never be developed, as planned property bound by perpetual conservation easements and protected as critical habitat for endangered species. The attorney immediately filed requests for all documents related to the sale, discovering glaring irregularities in the transaction. The seller, supposedly unreachable on expedition, had never directly communicated with any party involved in the sale. All communications had come through an unregistered representative who provided electronic signatures and minimal documentation. As the Ellistons' legal team dug deeper, they discovered the extensive federal protections on the property and the complete absence of mandatory notifications to government agencies about the sale. By this point, their attorney recognized they were dealing with potential fraud and contacted federal authorities directly to protect his client's interests. Back in Montana, I remained at my cabin documenting everything and maintaining regular contact with my attorney. On the fourth day after my arrival, I received a text from an unknown number. "This is Timothy Elliston. I believe there has been a serious misunderstanding about the property I purchased from you. Please contact me immediately." I forwarded the message to my attorney without responding. She advised continuing my non-engagement policy as federal authorities were now actively investigating. The following morning brought the development I had been waiting for. My phone rang with Derek's number, his voice frantic when I answered. "What the hell is going on with your property?" he demanded, without greeting. "The buyer's attorney has been calling non-stop about some government protection nonsense. He says the sale might be invalid." "That sounds concerning," I replied neutrally. "What exactly did they say?" "Something about conservation easements and endangered species permits. Complete nonsense." "Did you know about this?" "I know my grandparents valued conservation." I answered truthfully, but incompletely. Derek's voice rose in frustration. "Their lawyer is threatening legal action against us. Jessica, against the family. You need to fix this immediately." "Fix what exactly? You sold property. That wasn't yours to sell, Derek. You forged my signature and impersonated me in a real estate transaction. What exactly would you like me to fix about that situation?" His momentary silence conveyed the first recognition that he might have miscalculated severely. "This is about the money, isn't it? You're angry. I sold it without telling you first. Look, we can work out a better split if that's what you want." "This isn't about money," I replied calmly. "This is about law and consequences." "Don't be dramatic. It's just some environmental red tape. We can work around it." "Some things can't be worked around, Derek. Some actions have consequences that can't be negotiated away." Before he could respond, I heard a commotion in the background and my father's voice demanding the phone. "Jessica," my father said sharply, "whatever game you're playing needs to stop immediately. Your brother was trying to help you, and now you're creating a legal nightmare for everyone." "I'm not playing any game, Dad. I'm at my cabin right now, the property Derek illegally sold without my consent. I haven't contacted anyone or taken any legal action. The situation you're experiencing is the natural result of selling federally protected land without proper authorization." "Protected land? What are you talking about?" I explained briefly about the conservation easements and endangered species designations information that had been available in public records for decades. "Why didn't you tell us about these restrictions?" he demanded, as though I had deliberately set a trap. Would it have mattered? Would it have stopped Derek from forging my signature and selling my property without permission? His silence answered my question more honestly than any words could have. "The buyer's lawyer called this morning. He finally said, his voice lower, concern replacing anger. He mentioned the FBI is involved now. Is that true?" "Federal land protection violations fall under federal jurisdiction," I confirmed. "Identity theft and wire fraud in real estate transactions are also federal crimes." The gravity of the situation finally seemed to penetrate. "What can we do to fix this?" he asked, his usual confidence shaken. "I don't know if it can be fixed, Dad. Some bells can't be unrung." After hanging up, I sat on my cabin's porch, watching golden eagles soar above the protected forest, their freedom, a stark contrast to the tangled human drama below. Whatever happened next was out of my hands, set in motion by my brother's actions and the legal protections my grandparents had wisely established decades ago. My phone rang again that afternoon. This time it was a formal call from the regional FBI office requesting an interview regarding the fraudulent sale of federally protected property. The consequences my family feared were now arriving in official capacity, and there was nothing any of us could do to stop them. 3 days after the FBI contacted me, I returned to Chicago at their request to provide formal statements about the property and the unauthorized sale. I checked into a downtown hotel rather than staying with Mia, needing space to process the rapidly evolving situation. The federal investigation was moving with surprising speed, the intersection of environmental crimes and financial fraud generating serious attention. I had just returned from a 2-hour interview at the federal building when my hotel room phone rang. The front desk informed me that my family was in the lobby, insisting on seeing me. After a moment's hesitation, I agreed to meet them in a private conference room the hotel provided. They arrived looking like different people than the confident, self-satisfied group from our dinner the week before. My father's face was drawn with worry, my mother appeared to have aged years in days, and Derek looked positively ill, dark circles under bloodshot eyes, suggesting sleepless nights. The buyer's lawyer called screaming this morning, Derek blurted the moment the door closed behind us. There are FBI agents at their office in San Francisco. FBI agents, Jessica. He's threatening to sue us for millions for fraudulent misrepresentation. I remained standing near the door, maintaining physical and emotional distance. That seems like a natural consequence of committing fraud. This isn't funny, my mother interjected, her voice quivering. This is our family's reputation, our business. Your father had to call in favors just to get our attorney to take his calls. I've been interviewed by federal agents twice, Derek said, running hands through disheveled hair. They're talking about wire fraud and identity theft charges. Actual criminal charges, Jessica. You forged my signature and impersonated me in a financial transaction, I replied evenly. Those are crimes, Derek. What exactly did you expect would happen? I expected my sister to help fix a misunderstanding instead of letting her family twist in the wind, he shouted, color rising in his face. My father stepped forward, assuming his problem-solver stance. Jessica, we understand you're upset about not being consulted. That was clearly a mistake. But surely there's a way forward that doesn't involve federal charges and lawsuits. The conservation status can be changed, restrictions lifted. I shook my head slowly. That's not how perpetual conservation easements work, Dad. They're permanent by design. That's the entire point. My grandparents ensured that land would remain protected forever, regardless of ownership. Everything has a price, he insisted. Environmental regulations get waived all the time for the right projects with the right connections. Not these. They're attached to the land title itself, reinforced by multiple federal acts, and tied to endangered species protection. They weren't created by some local zoning board you can pressure or bribe. My mother dabbed at tears with a monogrammed handkerchief. Your father is trying to find solutions, Jessica. Why are you being so difficult? The familiar accusation nearly made me laugh. Being difficult in my family had always meant having boundaries, priorities, or values that differed from theirs. I'm not being difficult. I'm stating facts. The property can't be developed. The sale was fraudulent on multiple levels. These aren't problems I created or that I can fix with a wave of my hand. Derek slammed his fist on the conference table. You could tell them you authorized me to act on your behalf. You could say you changed your mind about the sale. You want me to commit perjury during a federal investigation? I asked incredulously. To protect you from consequences of actions you've freely admitted were deliberate and calculated. I did it for you, he shouted, desperation cracking his voice. $850,000. I got top dollar for a worthless cabin you visit twice a year. I studied my brother carefully, wondering if he actually believed his own justification. That cabin and the land it sits on are priceless to me, Derek. Not because of monetary value, but because of what they represent. My grandparents entrusted me with something precious, something they knew I would protect and honor. Oh, spare us the environmental crusader speech, my mother snapped. This holier-than-thou attitude isn't helping anyone. My father, ever the pragmatist, tried a different approach. The buyers are the real victims here. They paid good money for property they can't use as intended. If we could just get you and them in a room together, perhaps negotiate some kind of settlement. The buyers failed to conduct proper due diligence before purchasing, I pointed out. Their attorney cut corners on the title search. Derek deliberately circumvented normal procedures and forged documents. I'm not responsible for fixing problems created by other people's choices. So you'll let your brother go to jail, my mother whispered, finally, grasping the severity of the situation. Your own family. The question hung in the air between us, heavy with implication. For the first time I saw genuine fear in Derek's eyes. The swaggering confidence completely evaporated. I didn't create this situation, I said finally. I've simply allowed the natural legal process to unfold without interference. The same process that would have prevented the sale if Derek hadn't deliberately circumvented it. What do you want? Derek asked, voice hollow. Money. An apology. What will it take for you to help us? The question revealed how fundamentally he still misunderstood both the situation and me. He still believed this was a negotiation, a game of leverage, where the right offer would solve everything. This isn't about what I want, Derek. Some things can't be bargained away. Some actions have consequences beyond our control. My father, sensing the conversation was not progressing, as hoped, switched to damage control mode. We need to present a united front to the authorities. Family loyalty must come first. Whatever our private disagreements, we handle them internally, not by allowing outside forces to tear us apart. The familiar refrain of family loyalty struck me differently now. For years it had been the emotional lever used to extract concessions and silence disagreement. Family loyalty had always been a one-way street in the Harper household, flowing from me toward them, never reciprocated. Where was family loyalty when you decided to sell my property without permission? I asked quietly. Where was loyalty when you forged my name and impersonated me? Where was it when you celebrated taking something precious from me against my will? No one answered. The question wasn't meant to be answered, only to highlight the hypocrisy of their current appeal. I have been interviewed by federal investigators, I continued. I told them the complete truth that I never authorized the sale, never communicated with the buyers, and was unaware of the transaction until after it occurred. I have not pressed charges or demanded prosecution. The legal process is proceeding based on the facts of the case, not my wishes. So you're washing your hands of us, my mother concluded bitterly. No. I'm allowing the natural consequences of actions to unfold. There's a difference. Derek, who had been uncharacteristically quiet, looked up with reddened eyes. The FBI agent said I could face up to 20 years if convicted on all potential charges. 20 years, Jessica. For the first time, I felt a flicker of genuine compassion for my brother. Despite everything, I didn't want to see him incarcerated for decades. His actions deserved consequences, but perhaps not ones that would destroy his entire life. I can't stop the federal investigation, I said honestly, but I haven't encouraged them to pursue maximum charges either. What happens now depends partly on how you proceed. Meaning, my father asked sharply. Complete honesty and cooperation with authorities. Full restitution to the buyers. And acknowledgement of the wrongdoing rather than continuing to justify it. My brother looked at our father, who gave a slight nod. And if we do that, Derek asked, will you speak on my behalf? Tell them you don't want charges pressed. I considered carefully before answering. I will tell them truthfully that I believe you understand the severity of your actions and that you're taking responsibility for them. I won't lie or misrepresent facts, but I won't advocate for maximum penalties either. It wasn't the blanket absolution they had come seeking, but it was all I could honestly offer. My father recognized it as the best deal available and gave a curt nod. We should meet with our attorney immediately, he said to Derek, then turned back to me. This isn't over, Jessica. When the dust settles, we'll need to have a serious conversation about your place in this family. The threat might have wounded me once. Now it felt almost liberating. I look forward to it, I replied, with complete sincerity. After they left, I called my attorney to update her on the conversation. She commended my handling of the situation while warning that the road ahead would likely be long and potentially painful for everyone involved. As evening fell over Chicago, I sat by my hotel window watching city lights replace the sunset. My phone buzzed with a text from Derek meeting with FBI tomorrow morning. We'll tell full truth. Thank you for not abandoning me completely. It was the closest thing to genuine gratitude I had received from my brother in years. Perhaps from this wreckage something authentic might eventually be salvaged. Only time would tell. The following 3 months unfolded in a blur of legal proceedings, family tensions, and personal recalibration. The federal investigation proceeded methodically, with Derek fully cooperating as promised. His confession detailed not only the forged documents and identity theft, but also implicated my parents in knowingly facilitating the fraudulent sale. My father, leveraging connections and an expensive legal team, negotiated an immunity deal in exchange for his testimony about broader patterns of questionable business practices in local real estate. My mother, technically uninvolved in the execution of the fraud, but aware of it, avoided charges, but suffered the social humiliation she had always feared most. The Ellistons, upon learning the full circumstances of the fraud, directed their legal action primarily at Derek and my parents, rather than me. Their attorney contacted me directly expressing appreciation for my transparency and cooperation with authorities. They ultimately received full restitution, plus additional damages funded primarily by liquidating several of my parents' investment properties. Derek's legal consequences, while significant, fell short of the catastrophic scenario he had initially feared. With his cooperation, full confession, and my statement that I didn't seek maximum punishment, he received a plea deal, 3 years in a minimum security federal facility, followed by 5 years probation and substantial fines. The conviction meant his real estate license was permanently revoked, closing the door on the career path he had followed since college. The family business suffered significant reputational damage as details of the case became public. Several pending deals collapsed as partners withdrew, concerned about associated legal risks. My father, at 62, faced rebuilding a business that had been the cornerstone of his identity and the source of his considerable pride. Throughout this period, the family fractured along unexpected lines. Natalie, my corporate attorney sister, who had remained on the sidelines during the initial confrontation, became an unexpected ally. Her legal background gave her clarity about the severity of Derek's actions that my parents seemed unable to grasp. What he did was indefensible, she told me during a rare sister lunch, 6 weeks after the hotel confrontation. I've reviewed the case files. This wasn't a misunderstanding or an oversight. It was calculated fraud. Coming from Natalie, who had always aligned herself with our parents' values and expectations, this acknowledgement meant more than she could know. "Why do you think they can't see it?" I asked, genuinely curious about our parents' continued justifications. She considered thoughtfully while stirring her coffee. They've spent decades bending rules and pushing boundaries in business. The line between aggressive tactics and illegal ones probably blurred long ago. Plus, admitting Derek did something truly wrong means acknowledging their role in shaping him. And enabling him, I added. And enabling him, she agreed with a sigh. The golden son could do no wrong even when he was clearly heading for disaster. This new honesty between us created space for reconciliation neither of us had anticipated. Natalie admitted she had envied my courage in forging my own path, while I confessed to envying her apparent ease in meeting family expectations. My parents, however, remained entrenched in resentment. Despite overwhelming evidence of wrongdoing, they continued to frame the situation as a family betrayal on my part. My father particularly struggled with what he perceived as my role in damaging the family business reputation. "You could have handled this privately," he insisted, during a tense meeting with family attorneys. "Instead, you let federal authorities drag our name through the mud." "I didn't invite federal authorities into this situation," I reminded him calmly. "Derek did that by selling protected land illegally. I simply didn't obstruct their investigation or lie to protect him." My mother maintained a chilly distance, canceling our occasional lunch dates and excluding me from smaller family gatherings. The hurt was real, but less devastating than it might have been years earlier. At 35, I had built a life that didn't revolve around seeking their approval, a freedom they had never fully understood or respected. 6 months after the initial confrontation with Derek serving his sentence and the legal proceedings largely resolved, I invited my parents to the cabin. To my surprise, they accepted, perhaps out of curiosity about the property that had caused such upheaval. They arrived on a clear autumn day, the forest ablaze with fall colors. I watched their expressions as they stepped from their luxury SUV, taking in the modest cabin and the breathtaking natural surroundings. "This is what all the fuss was about," my mother asked, gesturing toward the small structure. "It's so rustic." "The cabin itself isn't the point," I explained, leading them toward a hiking trail. "It's what surrounds it that matters." Over the next 2 hours, I showed them things they had never bothered to see or understand. The rare orchid species growing in protected groves, the eagle nesting areas visible from certain vantage points, the delicate ecosystem my grandparents had recognized as worth preserving. My father remained largely silent, occasionally asking surprisingly thoughtful questions about conservation strategies. My mother maintained a polite distance, clearly uncomfortable in hiking boots borrowed for the occasion. At the property's highest point, overlooking a valley where the national forest stretched toward distant mountains, I paused to let them absorb the vista. "Your grandparents left you more than just land," my father said, finally breaking a long silence. "They left you their values. I see that now." It wasn't an apology, or even a full acknowledgement of wrongdoing, but from my father, it was significant concession. My mother said nothing, but her expression had softened slightly, perhaps seeing for the first time something of actual value in my chosen path. As we walked back toward the cabin, a text message arrived from Natalie Derek, called from prison. "He's enrolled in an environmental science course. Says he wants to understand your world better." I showed the message to my parents, watching mixed emotions play across their faces, confusion, skepticism, and perhaps a flicker of hope that something positive might emerge from this painful chapter. Back at the cabin preparing a simple lunch, my father asked the question that had likely brought them here. "What happens now, Jessica, with the family?" "That depends on what everyone wants to happen," I replied, honestly. "Relationships can heal, but they need to be based on mutual respect, not just shared DNA." "You make it sound so simple," my mother said with unexpected weariness. "It's not simple at all. It's probably the hardest work we could do, but maybe worth doing." They left that afternoon with no dramatic breakthroughs or emotional declarations, but something had shifted subtly. The pretense that had characterized our relationship for decades, the fiction that we understood and accepted each other, had been replaced by something more honest, if less comfortable. As I watched their car disappear down the dirt road, I felt neither triumph nor bitterness, but a quiet certainty that whatever relationship we rebuilt would be more authentic than what had existed before. That evening, I sat on my cabin porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in colors no human development could improve upon. My phone buzzed with a message from an unexpected source, Derek writing from the prison email system. "The environmental science instructor mentioned conservation easements today. Now, I finally understand what you were trying to protect. I'm sorry I couldn't see it before. Not asking for forgiveness, just wanted you to know." It wasn't resolution or redemption, but it was something neither of us had managed before a moment of genuine understanding across the divide that had separated us for so long. 1 year after the fateful family dinner, where Derek announced selling my property, I stood on the cabin porch watching volunteers plant native seedlings along the eastern boundary. The area damaged by the surveyors and preliminary work done by the Elliston's contractors was being restored with the help of local conservation groups and university students. The legal aftermath had finally settled into its permanent shape. Derek was 8 months into his 3-year sentence, writing regular letters that revealed a person I barely recognized, more reflective and less driven by material success. My parents had downsized their home and lifestyle partly from financial necessity after the legal settlements, and partly from a shifting perspective on what mattered. The family business continued, but in altered form, focusing on environmentally sustainable development projects, a pivot my father claimed was purely practical in the current market, but which suggested a deeper recalibration. My mother had surprised everyone by volunteering with a community garden program, discovering unexpected satisfaction in nurturing growing things. Natalie and I had established a new tradition of monthly hikes, sometimes at my property and sometimes in forest preserves near Chicago. During these walks, we rebuilt a relationship based on adult understanding rather than childhood rivalry, discovering common ground neither of us had recognized before. The cabin itself had evolved as well. With foundation grants and support from conservation organizations impressed by the case's outcome, I had expanded the research facilities while maintaining the property's rustic character. Graduate students now regularly conducted field studies on the land, documenting species recovery and ecosystem health. The Ellistons, after their initial anger and disappointment, had become unexpected allies. Timothy Elliston, the tech executive whose dream home had dissolved in legal complications, reached out 6 months after the case concluded. His perspective had shifted dramatically after learning about the property's ecological significance. "We wanted a place to connect with nature," he wrote in an email that began our correspondence. "I now see the irony in planning to destroy exactly what we were seeking." The Ellistons eventually purchased a different property nearby, one without conservation restrictions, but designed a modest home that minimized environmental impact. They became supporters of the research station with Timothy, joining the advisory board and providing technology that enhanced our monitoring capabilities. Most surprisingly, the federal officials who investigated the case connected me with a national conservation initiative, seeking property owners willing to establish new conservation easements. I began consulting with this program, sharing my experience, and helping design improved documentation systems that would prevent similar legal complications for other protected properties. On a crisp October morning, I welcomed a special visitor to the cabin, Judge Marilyn Harmon, who had presided over Derek's case and taken particular interest in the conservation aspects. Now retired, she had requested a tour of the property that had been central to one of her final cases. It's rare in my line of work to see the actual place at the heart of a legal matter, she commented as we walked the restored eastern boundary. Usually it's all abstractions and paper descriptions. Does seeing it change your perspective on the case? I asked. She paused, looking out over the valley where golden eagles soared. It confirms my ruling was correct, but it adds dimension. This isn't just protected land on paper. It's a living system worth preserving. Her validation meant more than she could know, reinforcing that the painful family rupture had served a greater purpose. That evening, I hosted a small gathering at the cabin for the volunteers, researchers, and conservation officials who had become part of my expanded community. As conversation flowed around the outdoor fire pit, I stepped away briefly to call Derek at the scheduled time allowed by the prison system. "How was the restoration planting?" he asked immediately, having followed the project through our letters. "Successful. 30 volunteers, over 300 native seedlings planted. Send pictures if you can. My environmental science instructor would be interested." We spoke for the allowed 15 minutes, the awkwardness of earlier calls replaced by genuine conversation. Before hanging up, he said something that caught me by surprise. "I understand now why Grandpa and Grandma left you the land. They knew you'd see what really mattered about it." Coming from Derek, who had once dismissed my entire career as playing with animals, this represented a fundamental shift in perspective. The following week brought another significant development. My parents requested a family meeting at their downsized but still comfortable condominium. Natalie and I arrived together, both apprehensive about what might transpire. My father, looking noticeably older, but somehow more at peace, got directly to the point. "We've been doing a lot of thinking and talking this past year," he began, "about family values and the legacy we want to leave." My mother nodded, adding, "Your father and I have decided to establish a family foundation focused on conservation and sustainable development." I exchanged surprised glances with Natalie. "We'd like both of you involved," my father continued. "Natalie's legal expertise and Jessica's environmental knowledge. It won't make up for past mistakes, but it might create something positive for the future." It wasn't quite an apology, but from my parents, it represented a seismic shift, an acknowledgement that my values and work had merit worthy of their support. "We've also set up a trust fund for Derek's release," my mother added, "specifically for education and career redirection. He's expressed interest in environmental compliance consulting, using his real estate background in a new way." The irony wasn't lost on any of us. The brother who had fraudulently sold protected land, potentially building a future career, ensuring others didn't make similar mistakes. Over the following months, the foundation took shape, beginning with modest local projects, but expanding as my parents redirected their business connections toward conservation goals. My father, applying the same determination that had built his real estate empire, became surprisingly effective at fundraising for environmental causes. As the one-year anniversary of the case's resolution approached, I received an unexpected package from Derek. Prison regulations prohibited sending most items, but he had received special permission for this, a handcrafted wooden plaque made in the prison workshop. Burned into the wood were the words Harper Family Protected Lands, established 1979, preserved forever. Beneath it was a note for the cabin, a reminder that some mistakes lead to better understanding. See you in 2 years, 4 months, and 17 days. I hung the plaque beside the cabin door, a tangible symbol of how far we had come and how much had changed. That evening, sitting on the porch, watching the sunset, I reflected on the journey of the past year. The betrayal that had seemed devastating had ultimately strengthened my resolve and clarified what truly mattered. The family relationships that had fractured had begun healing into more authentic connections based on genuine understanding rather than obligation. The protected land around me, temporarily threatened, but ultimately secured, continued its quiet existence, indifferent to human drama, yet profoundly affected by human choices. My grandparents' legacy had endured not just in legal protections, but in the values that had finally begun to influence even the most unlikely family members. As darkness settled over the forest and stars emerged above the trees, I thought about sharing this story with you. When we stand firm for what matters, even through painful confrontations and difficult consequences, we create possibilities for genuine growth and change that might otherwise never exist. Have you ever had to stand your ground to protect something valuable, even when it meant facing conflict with those closest to you? What gave you the courage to maintain your boundaries? I would love to hear your stories in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please give it a like and subscribe to hear more about standing up for what matters, even when it isn't easy. Thank you for listening. And remember that sometimes the most important protected lands are the boundaries we set in our own lives.